The morning of April 9th, 1943, Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke stood in the conning tower of U-515, scanning the Atlantic horizon 600 miles west of the Canary Islands. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and empty under a moonless sky. For 2 years, Henke had operated in these waters with the confidence of a man who understood their rules. The Atlantic, he believed, still belonged to Germany. At 35 years old, Henke represented the elite of the Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm. He had commanded U-515 for 18 months, sending over 25 merchant ships to the bottom, nearly 180,000 tons of Allied shipping destroyed. His crew knew him as demanding but competent, a captain who brought them home alive while other boats vanished without trace. On this April morning, running on the surface to recharge batteries, Henke had every reason to believe his expertise would continue to prevail. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The confidence Henke felt was not personal vanity, but professional assessment based on experience. He had survived 42 months of Atlantic operations by mastering the fundamental advantage of submarine warfare: invisibility. A U-boat could see without being seen, strike without warning, and vanish beneath the waves before the enemy could respond. The mathematics seemed indisputable. Admiral Karl Dönitz had calculated that 300 operational U-boats could sever Britain's Atlantic lifeline within months, and by early 1943, that number was nearly within reach. Henke had been trained at the submarine school in Neustadt in 1940, when the U-boat service represented Germany's best hope of strangling Britain into submission. His instructors, many of them veterans of the First World War, had drilled into every cadet the essential truth of undersea warfare. The ocean was vast, three-dimensional, and fundamentally opaque. Finding a silent submarine in the Atlantic was mathematically comparable to finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. This wasn't propaganda, it was physics. The training had been exhaustive and realistic. Henke learned to read ocean conditions, to predict weather patterns, and to calculate fuel consumption with precision. He practiced emergency dives until his crew could submerge from surface to periscope depth in under 30 seconds. He studied British convoy tactics, destroyer search patterns, the limitations of enemy detection equipment. Most importantly, he learned patience, the ability to wait submerged for hours, moving at 4 knots on electric motors, making no sound louder than a whisper. By early 1943, German shipyards at Kiel, Hamburg, Bremen and Danzig were completing new Type 7 and Type 9 U-boats at an accelerating pace. Production had climbed to approximately 20 boats per month, with plans to increase further. Henke knew these figures because they were shared at officer briefings in Lorient, the massive U-boat base on the French Atlantic coast where concrete pens protected submarines from Allied bombing. The numbers seemed to validate Dönitz's strategy. Germany was winning the production race, launching boats faster than the Allies could sink them. What Henke and his fellow commanders understood about Allied detection capabilities was limited and largely outdated. They knew the British employed ASDIC, an active sonar system that sent sound pulses through water and listened for echoes. But ASDIC had well-documented limitations. It functioned poorly in rough seas. Its effective range rarely exceeded 2,500 meters. Most critically, it required the hunting vessel to be relatively close to the target, and the vastness of the Atlantic made random encounters unlikely. German intelligence had identified another Allied detection system, radar. The British had used radar effectively during the Battle of Britain in 1940 to detect incoming Luftwaffe formations. But submarine conning towers presented small radar targets, low to the water, and difficult to distinguish from wave clutter. More importantly, U-boats had been equipped with METOX radar detectors, receivers that could detect radar transmissions from patrol aircraft, providing sufficient warning time to dive before being spotted visually. The METOX system had proven reliable throughout 1942. When the detector's distinctive whistle sounded, indicating radar pulses from an approaching aircraft, the watch officer ordered an emergency dive. 40 seconds later, the boat would be underwater, invisible, safe. The system had saved U-515 on at least a dozen occasions. Henke trusted it completely. The operational reality of 1942 had reinforced this confidence throughout the craned U-boat service. Henke's first 3 patrols in U-515 had been remarkably successful. His initial cruise netted 5 merchant ships, his second patrol 7. He had survived depth-charge attacks by British destroyers using tactics that had been taught at Neustadt: go deep, run silent, wait for the frustrated escorts to exhaust their depth charges and move on. It had always worked. The ocean's vastness and opacity remained Germany's most reliable ally. The propaganda machinery of the Third Reich had elevated successful U-boat commanders to celebrity status. Günther Prien, who had penetrated the British naval base at Scapa Flow and sunk the battleship Royal Oak, was a national hero. Otto Kretschmer and Joachim Schepke were household names, their exploits featured in newsreels shown across Germany. Henke himself had appeared in a Deutsche Wochenschau newsreel after sinking a 10,000-ton tanker within sight of the African coast. The public narrative was clear. U-boat commanders were Germany's new knights, waging a clean and honourable war against British merchant shipping. This narrative was not entirely false. Henke took no pleasure in killing merchant seamen. He followed international law regarding survivors when circumstances permitted, and he restricted his attacks to legitimate military and commercial targets. But the broader message that Germany was winning the Atlantic battle through superior tactics and courage seemed validated by results. Throughout 1942, U-boats had sunk over 6 million tons of Allied shipping while losing fewer than 90 boats. The exchange ratio appeared decisively favourable. Yet by early 1943, subtle indications suggested the tactical situation was changing. U-boats were taking longer to find convoys. When they did locate targets, the escorts seemed more numerous and aggressive. Several boats had reported encounters with aircraft appearing suddenly in areas that should have been beyond patrol range. Henke had heard rumours of boats being detected at night, in fog, under conditions where visual spotting should have been impossible. These reports were fragmentary and often contradictory. No single incident provided clear evidence of a new Allied capability, just a pattern of near misses, unexplained detections, and boats that departed on patrol and never returned. In March 1943 alone, 15 U-boats had been lost. This was explained at headquarters as the inevitable cost of intensified operations. Dönitz himself had stated publicly that for every U-boat lost, the Allies lost 20 merchant ships. The mathematics, if true, remained favourable. What Henke could not have known, what German naval intelligence had not yet pieced together, was that the Allies had achieved a technological breakthrough that would fundamentally transform submarine warfare. Multiple innovations, developed separately but now being integrated into a coordinated system, were about to make the U-boat's greatest advantage, its invisibility, functionally obsolete. British scientists had refined radar to operate on centimetric wavelengths, 10 centimeters instead of the longer wavelengths the METOX detector was designed to detect. This new radar was small enough to install on patrol aircraft, powerful enough to detect a submarine conning tower at ranges exceeding 10 miles, and completely invisible to existing German radar warning receivers. U-boats were being caught on the surface by aircraft they never knew were approaching. American industry was mass-producing a device called a Sonar Buoy, an expendable acoustic sensor that could be dropped from aircraft, would descend on a small parachute, and upon hitting the water would activate automatically. The device consisted of a hydrophone to detect underwater sounds, a radio transmitter to relay those sounds back to the aircraft, and a battery providing 30 to 60 minutes of operation before the unit sank. The technology was simple, inexpensive, and devastatingly effective. But on the morning of April 9th, 1943, as Werner Henke stood in U-515's conning tower, he knew none of this. He understood the war as he had been trained to understand it, as a contest of tactics, courage, and seamanship in which German technical excellence and operational skill could overcome Allied numerical superiority. The ocean was vast. U-boats were small and silent. The fundamental equations favored the submarine. The night was calm. Visibility was good. The diesel engines rumbled steadily, driving the generators that recharged the massive battery banks. Henke's watch officer scanned the horizon with binoculars in a practiced pattern: forward, starboard, aft, port, then up to check for aircraft. Standard procedure, repeated every few minutes, hour after hour. Everything appeared normal. Henke was planning his next operational area. Intelligence from Lorient suggested that convoy traffic off the American East Coast had increased dramatically. The United States had been in the war for 16 months now, and their industrial mobilization was beginning to affect shipping volumes. More targets meant more opportunities, though it also meant more escorts. The balance, Henke calculated, remained in the U-boat's favor if you were patient, if you were skilled, if you understood the ocean. He thought about his crew. 54 men, most of them younger than 25, all volunteers. They had been together for over a year, and they trusted each other completely. The engineering crew could diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone. The torpedo men could reload tubes in pitch darkness. The radio operator could decode messages with enemy destroyers passing overhead. This expertise, Henke believed, was Germany's real advantage, not just the technology, but the human skill that made the technology effective. What Henke did not realize, standing in that conning tower on that calm April morning, was that human skill was about to become insufficient. The war was no longer a contest between skilled opponents employing roughly comparable technology. It had become an industrial and scientific race that Germany was losing catastrophically. The Allies were deploying detection systems faster than U-boats could adapt to them, producing anti-submarine assets in quantities that made individual tactical excellence irrelevant. The technological transformation was occurring at a pace unprecedented in military history. In January 1943, fewer than 50 Allied aircraft were equipped with centimetric radar. By April, the number exceeded 200. Sonar Buoy production had begun in March. By May, American factories would be completing over 10,000 units per month. The escort carrier program, which had commissioned its first ship in mid-1942, would launch 3 new vessels per month throughout 1943. These were not incremental improvements but qualitative shifts in capability. A patrol aircraft equipped with centimetric radar and sonar buoys could monitor an area of ocean several hundred square miles, detect any U-boat that surfaced within that zone, and track submarines underwater using acoustic sensors. Previously, the same aircraft could only search the narrow strip of ocean. It could physically see perhaps 30 miles wide along its flight path. The detection probability had increased by several orders of magnitude. Werner Henke, despite his experience and expertise, could not have understood this transformation because it was occurring beyond his observation. Individual U-boat commanders reported isolated incidents, unusual detections, unexpected attacks, but no single commander saw the complete picture. German naval intelligence collected reports but lacked the analytical capability to recognize that these incidents represented coordinated deployment of new technologies rather than random bad luck. The belief system that sustained Henke and thousands of other U-boat men was about to collide with a reality that would prove not just different from their expectations, but fundamentally incompatible with them. The ocean they believed they understood, vast, opaque, favorable to submarines, no longer existed. It had been transformed into a monitored grid where Allied aircraft could detect, track, and destroy submarines with industrial efficiency. But standing in U-515's conning tower on that April morning, Werner Henke remained confident. He had survived 42 months of combat through skill, caution, and understanding of submarine warfare's fundamental principles. Those principles, he believed, remained valid. The ocean was still dark. U-boats were still invisible. German tactical excellence could still prevail. Then, without warning, the Metox detector began to scream. "Aircraft!" The watch officer shouted, his voice cutting through the diesel engine noise. "Diving! Diving!" Henke didn't question, didn't look. He dropped through the conning tower hatch instantly, the watch officer right behind him. The last man down yanked the hatch closed and spun the wheel to dog it tight. "Bridge secured," he called. The klaxon was already blaring. Throughout U-515, men moved with practiced precision. The engineering crew opened valves to flood the ballast tanks. The bow planes angled down sharply. The diesel engines cut off, and electric motors took over with a high-pitched whine. Compressed air roared as it was forced from the ballast tanks. 40 seconds after the alarm, U-515 slipped beneath the Atlantic surface, descending through the darkness toward relative safety. Henke watched the depth gauge, 20 meters, 40, 60, 80. At 150 meters, he ordered the dive halted. Level off, silent running, all unnecessary equipment secured. The boat settled at depth, hovering in the darkness, running on minimal electrical power. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the electric motors and the occasional creak of the pressure hull adjusting to depth. This was standard procedure: wait for the aircraft to pass, then surface cautiously after dark to resume battery charging. Henke checked his watch. 10 minutes had elapsed since diving. The aircraft should be long gone by now, continuing on its patrol pattern. He'd give it another 20 minutes to be safe. Then, the hydrophone operator suddenly stiffened, pressing his headphones tight against his ears. "Sir, I'm hearing splashes on the surface. Multiple impacts, not depth charges, too light. Smaller objects entering the water." Henke moved to the hydrophone station. "How many?" "Difficult to count, sir. Perhaps 10, maybe 15. Spread across a wide area above us. Could they be practice bombs? Marker buoys?" "Unknown, sir. But—" The operator's face went pale. "Sir, I'm now detecting transmissions. Active acoustic pings. Multiple sources." This made no sense. ASDIC required a ship, a destroyer, or corvette with generators, operators, and the complete sonar apparatus. These were objects dropped from an aircraft, small enough to deploy in quantity, and they were transmitting, searching for U-515 with sound pulses. "New contact," the hydrophone operator called. "More splashes. Closer to our current position, the pinging is intensifying." Henke made a decision. "Come left, of course, 090, speed 4 knots. Maintain depth." U-515 turned slowly, trying to slip away from the pinging sources. The boat crept through the darkness, every man aboard acutely aware that they were being hunted by something they didn't understand. 5 minutes later, the hydrophone operator reported more splashes. "Sir, they're dropping more of these devices. They seem to be tracking our movement." The realization hit Henke like a physical blow. The aircraft had stayed in the area. It was listening to these underwater devices, receiving information about U-515's location, and deploying additional sensors to maintain contact. This wasn't random, it was coordinated hunting using technology he'd never encountered. "All stop," Henke ordered. "Complete silence." The electric motors shut down. U-515 drifted in the current, making no sound except the unavoidable ambient noise of water flowing past the hull. Perhaps if they remained absolutely still, these devices would lose contact. The hydrophone operator shook his head slowly. "Sir, the pinging continues. Multiple sources, all around us. I believe they're detecting us even without movement." Then came the sound every submariner feared, the high-pitched whistle of falling bombs. "Brace for impact." The first pattern of depth charges detonated 300 meters away, close enough to throw men against bulkheads, to shatter gauges, to rain cork insulation from the overhead. The lights flickered. In the engine room, someone screamed as superheated steam vented from a cracked fitting. But what terrified Henke wasn't the depth charges themselves. He'd survived depth charge attacks before. It was the accuracy. The aircraft had found them in darkness, underwater, after they'd changed course. Found them quickly enough to deploy fresh patterns of these acoustic devices, then attack with devastating precision. Damage report. The engineering officer's voice came over the intercom. Minor steam leak, section 4. No structural damage. We're sealing it now. Come right to course 180, down to 200 meters. The boat tilted forward, descending deeper into the Atlantic's crushing pressure. At 200 meters, the hull groaned audibly. This was approaching U-515's maximum rated depth, but depth meant distance from those devices on the surface, distance from the aircraft above. The hydrophone operator's voice was strained. "Sir, the pinging is fainter but still detectable. The devices appear to be drifting with the surface current, but they're maintaining acoustic contact." For 3 hours, this continued. U-515 crept through the depths at the very edge of her design limits, trying to evade sensors she couldn't see, hunted by an enemy using technology Henke had never imagined possible. Every few minutes, the hydrophone operator would report more splashes as the aircraft deployed additional acoustic sensors, maintaining a web of detection around the submarine. The air inside the boat grew foul. At depth, the carbon dioxide scrubbers worked less efficiently. Men breathed shallowly, trying to conserve the remaining oxygen. The temperature climbed. The lack of ventilation, combined with the heat from electrical equipment, created conditions approaching 40 degrees Celsius in some compartments. Henke calculated their remaining battery capacity. At this consumption rate, they had perhaps 4 more hours of underwater operation. After that, they would have no choice but to surface, regardless of what waited above. Then, gradually, the attacks stopped. The splashing sounds ceased. The acoustic pinging slowly faded as the devices exhausted their batteries and sank. Henke waited another hour before ordering U-515 back to periscope depth. The periscope showed an empty ocean, twilight darkening into night, no aircraft visible. Cautiously, he surfaced the boat. The crew stumbled up through the hatches, gasping fresh air, their faces pale and drawn. Several men vomited over the side, a combination of bad air, stress, and relief. Henke ordered the diesel engines to start immediately to recharge the depleted batteries. "What were those things?" the executive officer asked quietly. Henke had no answer, but he knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental had changed. The ocean was no longer dark in the way he'd understood darkness. The Allies had found a way to make it transparent, to track submarines underwater, to hunt them, with a persistence and accuracy that made traditional evasion tactics obsolete. 3 weeks later, during a rendezvous with U-459, a Type 14 supply submarine, Henke learned he wasn't alone in encountering this new weapon. The rendezvous point was 500 miles north of the Azores, chosen because it should have been far from Allied patrol areas. Commander Wilamowitz Moellendorf of U-459 was transferring fuel, food, and torpedoes to 4 U-boats simultaneously, including U-515. The boats clustered together on the surface, hoses stretched between them, crews working frantically to complete the transfer before daylight. "They're called Sonar Buoys," Wilamowitz explained during a brief meeting aboard U-459. "At least, that's what intelligence suggests based on captured documents." He showed Henke a sketch recovered from a downed American patrol aircraft. The device was surprisingly simple, a cylindrical container approximately 1 meter long, containing a hydrophone, a radio transmitter, and batteries. Dropped from an aircraft, it descended on a small parachute. Upon hitting the water, a saltwater switch activated the electronics. The hydrophone listened for submarine sounds, diesel engines, electric motors, even water noise flowing past a hull. The radio immediately transmitted everything the hydrophone detected back to the patrol aircraft. "The range is limited," Wilamowitz continued. "Perhaps 5 to 8 kilometers, depending on conditions, and the battery only lasts 30 minutes to an hour, but that's sufficient. Sufficient for what? To track us. The Americans deploy them in patterns 10, 15, 20 buoys dropped in a single pass. They create an acoustic grid across several hundred square kilometers of ocean. Any submarine within that grid is detected immediately. The aircraft triangulates our position using multiple buoys, then deploys additional buoys to maintain contact. Even if we change course, even if we go deep and silent, the passive hydrophones still hear us." Henke absorbed this information, connecting it to his own experience. The cost? Intelligence estimates approximately $200 per unit, disposable. The Americans are producing them by the thousands. The economic implications were staggering. For less than the cost of a single torpedo, the Allies could deploy a device that made that torpedo irrelevant by preventing the U-boat from reaching attack position. German technological sophistication was being defeated by American industrial mass production of simple, expendable sensors. A young Oberleutnant from UN 85 spoke up. "My captain says the loss rate in the Bay of Biscay transit routes has become unsustainable. Boats are being caught during transit to and from the French bases. Some commanders are trying to remain submerged for the entire transit, but the batteries can't sustain it. You have to surface eventually, and when you do, they're waiting with sonar buoys and radar. And it's getting worse," another commander added. "They're combining the sonar buoys with surface ships now. An aircraft detects us with radar, forces us to dive, then deploys sonar buoys to track us underwater while calling in destroyers. By the time we exhaust our batteries and have to surface, there are 3 or 4 destroyers waiting, perfectly positioned." Henke thought about the tactical implications. Everything he'd been taught about submarine warfare assumed that diving provided safety, that underwater a submarine was effectively invisible until it chose to reveal itself. But if sonar buoys could track submerged submarines, then diving only delayed detection, which didn't prevent it. The fundamental advantage of the submarine invisibility had been compromised. "What about acoustic countermeasures?" Henke asked. "Can we deploy noisemakers? Create false targets?" Wilamowitz shook his head. "We've tried. The Americans have apparently trained their hydrophone operators to distinguish between actual submarine machinery sounds and noisemakers. The false targets delay them briefly but don't prevent detection. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this." As the refueling continued, Henke gathered more information from the other commanders. The technological picture being assembled was far worse than he'd imagined. The sonar buoy represented just one component of what Allied forces were calling hunter-killer tactics, a coordinated system of detection and attack technologies deployed together. Centimetric radar. The new radar sets operated on 10-centimeter wavelengths that the METOX detector couldn't detect. British and American patrol aircraft could now locate surfaced U-boats at ranges exceeding 15 kilometers in total darkness. U-boats were being surprised on the surface by aircraft they never knew were approaching until bombs were already falling. High-frequency direction finding. Allied ships and coastal stations could triangulate any U-boat's position whenever it transmitted radio messages. Every time headquarters requested a position report, every time a commander reported a convoy sighting, Allied direction-finding stations across the Atlantic pinpointed the transmission source within 50 kilometers. Patrol aircraft would then be vectored to that area to begin active searching with sonar buoys. Magnetic anomaly detection. American aircraft were deploying devices that could sense the magnetic signature of a submarine's steel hull, even when submerged. The detection range was limited only a few hundred meters, but combined with sonar buoys to vector the aircraft to the general area, the magnetic detector could provide a final precise location for depth charge release. Escort carriers. The Americans had begun converting merchant hulls into small aircraft carriers, specifically for anti-submarine warfare. These escort carriers sailed with convoys, providing continuous air cover. A U-boat attempting to attack a convoy now faced not just destroyer escorts but aircraft that could deploy sonar buoys, radar, and magnetic detectors while coordinating with surface ships in real time. Each technology individually represented a significant threat. Combined into an integrated system, they made successful U-boat operations approaching mathematical impossibility. The production statistics Henke learned from intelligence summaries were even more crushing. In 1943, the United States alone was manufacturing approximately 2,000 patrol aircraft suitable for maritime operations. American shipyards were completing destroyers and escort vessels at a rate exceeding 50 hulls per month. Escort carrier production had reached 3 vessels monthly, and sonar buoy production, according to the best intelligence estimates, exceeded 100,000 units per month by mid-year. Against this, Germany's entire U-boat construction capability represented roughly 300 boats annually at maximum output 25 per month. But the exchange ratio had collapsed. In May 1943, 41 U-boats were lost, while sinking only 58 merchant ships. For the first time in the war, U-boats were being destroyed faster than they could sink tonnage. Henke performed mathematics mentally. If current loss rates continued, the average U-boat would survive approximately 3 combat patrols. He was already well beyond that number. Statistically, he was already dead, just waiting for probability to catch up with him. But statistics meant nothing compared to the evidence gathered from returning crews. A commander from U-228 described being hunted continuously for 18 hours by aircraft deploying sonar buoys in relay as one aircraft exhausted its sonar buoy supply and returned to base. Another would arrive to continue the hunt. The submarine had been forced to remain submerged at crushing depth, air quality deteriorating to life-threatening levels, until finally surfacing from sheer desperation, only to face immediate attack. Another commander reported that his boat had been detected and attacked within minutes of surfacing at night in heavy weather conditions that should have made radar detection nearly impossible. The conclusion was that sonar buoys had already been in the water, perhaps deployed hours earlier by aircraft patrolling predicted transit routes, waiting passively for any submarine to enter their acoustic coverage area. The transformation from hunter to hunted had occurred with shocking speed. Just 18 months earlier, in late 1941 and early 1942, U-boats had operated along the American East Coast with near impunity during what commanders called the second happy time. Merchant ships had sailed independently, often fully lit, navigation lights burning. U-boats surfaced at night to attack with deck guns, conserving torpedoes. American coastal cities provided convenient navigation references with their peacetime lighting. Now, in mid-1943, approaching the American coast was suicidal. Patrol aircraft coverage extended hundreds of miles offshore. Convoys traveled with multiple escorts employing the latest detection equipment. Any submarine detected faced coordinated attack by air and surface forces working together with communications and tactics perfected through repeated practice. German technological responses were proving inadequate. The Schnorchel breathing tube, which allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth, reduced but didn't eliminate detection risk. Acoustic torpedoes that homed on destroyer propeller noise achieved some successes, but didn't address the fundamental problem that submarines were being found and attacked before reaching positions to launch torpedoes. Work was underway on improved hull coatings to reduce sonar reflections, on faster submarine designs that could outrun escorts, on hydrogen peroxide propulsion systems that would allow sustained high-speed underwater operation. But these technologies would take years to develop and deploy. The war was being decided now, in 1943, and the technical advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies. Henke understood the strategic implications with terrible clarity. Germany had lost the technological race. Allied industrial capacity was deploying better detection systems faster than U-boats could adapt. Individual skill, tactical innovation, willingness to accept casualties, none of it mattered when the enemy could mass-produce cheap acoustic sensors and deploy them across the entire Atlantic Ocean. The rendezvous broke up before dawn, the U-boats scattering to their operational areas. As U-515 departed, Henke looked at the other submarines on the horizon, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. He wondered how many would survive the next patrol. The statistical probability suggested fewer than half. On June 12, 1943, reality caught up with statistics. U-515 was operating west of Madeira, searching for convoy traffic. Henke surfaced cautiously after dark to recharge batteries, standard procedure, performed with maximum vigilance. The radar warning receiver remained silent. No visual contacts. The ocean appeared empty. Then an American Catalina flying boat appeared suddenly from a cloud bank, its centimetric radar having already detected U-515 from beyond visual range. The Metox detector, blind to the new radar frequency, had provided no warning. "Dive! Dive!" But even as the klaxon sounded, Henke knew they were too slow. The aircraft was already overhead, dropping not bombs but a pattern of cylindrical objects that splashed into the water around the diving. Submarine. Sonar Buoys. U-515 went deep 150 meters, then 200. Silent running. But through the hydrophones came the now familiar sound. Multiple acoustic sensors, pinging, triangulating, tracking. The boat maneuvered, trying to evade, but within minutes more splashes indicated fresh sonar buoys deployed in their new location. The Catalina maintained contact for 4 hours, deploying additional sonar buoy patterns whenever U-515 attempted to maneuver away. Then the hydrophone operator reported new contacts. "Propeller sounds, sir. High-speed screws. Bearing 035 and increasing. Multiple contacts, I count at least 2, possibly 3 surface vessels approaching. Destroyers, called in by the Catalina, vectored directly to U-515's location using sonar buoy-derived position data, arriving fresh and ready to attack, while U-515's batteries were already depleted by hours of evasion. What followed was 16 hours of continuous hunting. The destroyers maintained perfect acoustic contact, using their improved ASDIC sets. When U-515 maneuvered, the Catalina or relief aircraft that arrived to continue the hunt deployed additional sonobuoy patterns. The submarine couldn't surface to recharge batteries, couldn't escape, could only go deeper, run slower, wait for the inevitable. Henke tried everything he'd been taught. He ordered full speed to break contact, but the destroyers matched his speed and the battery drained catastrophically. He tried going deep to 250 meters, but the ASDIC tracked him effortlessly, and depth charges detonated close enough to spring hull plates. He tried creeping along at 2 knots, but the passive sonar buoys still detected the water noise flowing past U-515's hull. The air quality deteriorated as carbon dioxide levels climbed. Men gasped for breath. The temperature exceeded 45 degrees Celsius. The batteries were approaching total depletion, and, still, the hunting continued with mechanical persistence. ASDIC pinging, sonobuoy tracking, depth charges exploding in carefully plotted patterns designed to force the submarine toward areas where additional sensors waited. This wasn't combat, as Henke understood it. This was industrial extermination, technological superiority deployed with systematic efficiency to destroy submarines that could no longer hide, could no longer escape, could only wait to die or surface to surrender. Finally, with battery power exhausted and carbon dioxide approaching lethal concentrations, Henke had no choice remaining. Surface the boat. U-515 broke the surface into bright afternoon sunlight on April 9, 1944, exactly 1 year after Henke's first encounter with sonobuoys. The destroyer escort USS Chatelaine and the destroyer USS Pillsbury waited less than 2 kilometers away, their guns trained on the submarine's conning tower. Henke gave the order to abandon ship. The crew scrambled topside, many collapsing on the deck from exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. Several men were unconscious and had to be carried. The engineering officer set the scuttling charges 7 minutes to detonation, then followed the last men into the water. American sailors from the destroyers threw life rings and lowered boats to recover the German submariners. Henke watched from the water as U-515's bow lifted slowly, water pouring from her ballast tank vents. Then the scuttling charges detonated with a muffled roar deep inside the hull. The submarine settled stern first and slid beneath the Atlantic surface, descending to the ocean floor that Henke had believed belonged to Germany. Of the 54 men aboard U-515, 16 had died during the depth charge attacks or while abandoning ship. 38 survivors, including Henke, were pulled from the water and taken prisoner. The psychological state documented by American intelligence officers during initial interrogations revealed the depth of Henke's transformation. He was described in official reports as despondent and fatalistic, exhibiting what the interrogators recognized as severe trauma beyond normal combat stress. When asked about U-boat operational prospects, Henke stated flatly that continued operations were pointless against Allied detection capabilities. "You cannot hide from technology that makes the ocean transparent," he told one interrogator. "It doesn't matter how deep you go, how silent you remain. They drop Sonar Buoys until they find you. Then they wait until your batteries die. There is no escape, only time." The interrogator noted that Henke seemed particularly bitter about the Sonar Buoys themselves, repeatedly describing them as unfair and representing industrialized hunting rather than naval combat. This reaction was common among captured U-boat officers, a sense that the rules had been changed fundamentally, that skill and courage had become irrelevant, that they were being systematically exterminated by technological systems against which no defense existed. Another interrogator recorded Henke's statement about crew morale. "By late 1943, most experienced commanders understood we were already dead. The mathematics were simple. Average patrol survival was 3 missions. Every time you departed Lorient, you calculated the probability you would return. The probability declined with each patrol. Eventually, the probability reached 0. We were just waiting for statistics to catch us." This fatalistic acceptance was documented across dozens of interrogations of captured U-boat personnel throughout 1944. The psychological pattern was remarkably consistent: initial confidence based on early war successes, growing unease as losses mounted, and finally a kind of dissociative resignation, where crews continued operations while emotionally preparing for inevitable death. One engineering officer from U-515 told interrogators that by 1944, crew survival strategies focused primarily on denial. "We didn't discuss loss rates. We didn't calculate survival probabilities. We focused on immediate tactical concerns, maintenance schedules, watch rotations, torpedo checks. If you thought about the strategic situation, you couldn't function, so we stopped thinking about it." Werner Henke did not live to process the full implications of his experience. On June 15, 1944, while imprisoned at Fort Hunt, a military interrogation facility in Virginia, he attempted to escape during an outdoor exercise period. American guards shot him as he ran toward the perimeter fence. The official report stated he ignored verbal commands to halt and was killed by rifle fire. Some historians have questioned whether this represented a genuine escape attempt or what might be termed suicide by guard, a deliberate choice to die rather than accept survival after his submarine's loss. Henke's psychological state in the weeks before his death, documented in interrogation reports and prisoner correspondence, suggests severe depression and inability to accept his situation. Whether he genuinely believed escape was possible or simply chose to end his life in a manner that avoided direct suicide remains uncertain. What is certain is that Werner Henke died believing the war was lost, his expertise had become obsolete, and the ocean that had been his domain now belonged irrevocably to an enemy whose technological and industrial superiority could not be overcome by individual skill or courage. The broader statistical record of the U-boat war validates everything Henke came to understand during his final year of operations. The numbers document a transformation so complete that it represented not merely tactical defeat, but the obsolescence of an entire form of warfare. In 1942, before Sonar Buoy deployment reached operational scale, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied merchant ships while losing 87 boats, an exchange ratio of 13.3 ships destroyed per U-boat lost. At this rate, Germany appeared to be winning the Atlantic battle. British imports had fallen to critically low levels. American shipping losses threatened to delay military build-up in Britain. In 1943, as Sonar Buoys and associated technologies were deployed systematically, the equation inverted catastrophically. 237 U-boats were lost, while sinking only 597 merchant ships, an exchange ratio of 2.5 ships per boat. More significantly, Allied shipbuilding had accelerated dramatically. American shipyards alone completed over 1,900 merchant vessels in 1943, replacing losses faster than U-boats could sink ships. By 1944, with full-scale hunter-killer operations and comprehensive sonobuoy coverage across primary transit routes, the statistics became completely unsustainable for Germany. 241 U-boats were lost while sinking only 133 Allied merchant ships, an exchange ratio of 0.55 ships per submarine. Germany was losing boats faster than shipyards could replace them, while Allied merchant tonnage increased month by month. The transformation was so complete that by mid-1944, U-boat operations had become statistically indistinguishable from suicide missions. The average operational lifespan of a U-boat commissioned in 1944 was less than 3 combat patrols. Crew survival rates fell below 30%. Experienced commanders who had survived the early war years were systematically killed, leaving increasingly inexperienced captains commanding increasingly desperate missions against an enemy whose detection capabilities improved continuously. Allied operational research documented the effectiveness of Sonar Buoy deployment with clinical precision. Aircraft equipped with Sonar Buoys demonstrated detection rates 3 times higher than aircraft relying solely on visual search and radar. The ability to track submerged submarines transformed vast areas of the Atlantic from spaces where submarines could hide indefinitely into kill zones, where detection was merely a function of time. The production statistics reveal the industrial imbalance that made German defeat inevitable, regardless of tactical innovation. By war's end, the United States had manufactured over 350,000 Sonar Buoys at an average unit cost of approximately $200. The total program expenditure, roughly $70 million, represented less than the cost of constructing 3 Essex-class aircraft carriers. For comparison, Germany's entire U-boat construction program from 1939 through 1945 consumed resources equivalent to several billion Reichsmarks. Each Type 7 U-boat cost approximately 4.2 million Reichsmarks and required 9 months to build. The United States was producing effective counter-submarine systems at a fraction of the cost and time required to build the submarines those systems would destroy. This represented the fundamental lesson of industrialized warfare that Werner Henke learned too late. In conflicts between nations with vastly different productive capacities, the side that can mass-produce adequate technology faster than the enemy can deploy countermeasures will prevail, regardless of individual skill or tactical excellence. The Sonar Buoy cheap, simple, disposable, defeated the U-boat arm more decisively than any number of capital ships or destroyer flotillas could have achieved through conventional means. The human cost of this technological transformation was documented in statistics that remained classified for decades after the war. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in German U-boats during World War II, 28,000 died, a casualty rate of 70%, the highest of any military service in the war. Most of these deaths occurred in 1943 and 1944, after Allied detection technologies had made submarine operations unsustainable. Post-war interviews with surviving U-boat commanders revealed consistent psychological patterns. Men who had entered the service with confidence based on early successes described progressive stages of disillusionment. Initial denial that losses represented more than bad luck, gradual recognition that new Allied technologies had fundamentally changed the tactical situation, and finally fatalistic acceptance that survival was primarily a matter of statistical chance rather than skill. A former watch officer from U-230 described his last patrol in 1944. "We departed Lorient knowing we would not return. This wasn't pessimism, it was mathematical certainty. The loss rates meant that statistically we were already dead. The question was not whether we would die, but when and how. Some men hoped for quick death from depth charges. Others hoped to survive long enough to be captured. No one believed we would complete the patrol and return to base. This psychological state, continuing to perform duties while accepting inevitable death, was documented across hundreds of testimonies from U-boat survivors. It represented a form of dissociation where crews functioned operationally while emotionally detached from hope of survival. Commanders maintained discipline and tactical competence, while privately acknowledging that those efforts were ultimately futile against Allied technological superiority. The broader strategic implications became clear only in post-war analysis. Germany's U-boat campaign represented a massive investment of resources, industrial capacity, and trained personnel into a weapons system that Allied technology had rendered obsolete by mid-1943. The submarines continued operating for 2 more years, but their strategic effect after mid-1943 was negligible compared to the resources they consumed. Those resources, the steel, the skilled labor, the training time, the fuel might have been more effectively allocated to other military programs. But this assessment was impossible in real time because German intelligence never fully understood the scale of Allied technological deployment. Individual commanders reported encounters with new detection systems, but headquarters lacked comprehensive data showing that these encounters represented systematic deployment rather than isolated incidents. Werner Henke's experience was replicated thousands of times across the U-boat service. Skilled, confident professionals discovering that their expertise had become insufficient against an enemy employing industrial-scale technological solutions. The psychological cost of this discovery, the collapse of professional identity, the recognition that courage and skill were meaningless against Sonar Buoys, and radar was documented in interrogation reports, prisoner correspondence, and post-war testimonies. The final irony is that Henke's skills were genuinely exceptional. His ability to read ocean conditions, to predict escort patterns, to execute tactically sound operations under extreme stress, these capabilities would have ensured survival and success under 1941 or 1942 conditions. But by 1943, individual competence had become irrelevant. The war had become a contest of production statistics and technological systems, and that was a contest Germany could not win. The Sonar Buoy represented more than tactical innovation. It embodied a fundamental principle of 20th century warfare, that industrial capacity to mass-produce adequate technology rapidly would defeat attempts to maintain qualitative superiority through craftsmanship and expertise. This principle, demonstrated decisively in the Atlantic, would shape military thinking for decades afterward. American military doctrine absorbed this lesson explicitly. Post-war strategic planning emphasized rapid production of standardized, relatively simple weapons systems over development of fewer sophisticated platforms. The good enough, deployed in quantity philosophy that produced Sonar Buoys became foundational to Cold War military procurement. For the men who experienced the transition firsthand, who had operated confidently in 1942 only to find themselves hunted systematically in 1943, the transformation was not a matter of doctrine but survival. The letters and diaries of U-boat crew members document this in personal terms. The growing difficulty of sleeping, the hypervigilance that made relaxation impossible, the gradual acceptance that each patrol would likely be the last. One passage from a diary recovered from U-465, written in March 1944, captures this psychology. We surface at night and immediately begin listening for aircraft engines. We scan the sky constantly, knowing that radar has already detected us, that patrol planes are vectoring toward our position, that sonar buoys will soon be dropping around us. The ocean is no longer our ally. It has become a trap where we wait to be found, and we will be found. It is only a matter of time. This was the truth that Werner Henke learned during his final year, that the ocean belonged to whoever could deploy the most detection systems, coordinate the most patrol aircraft, and produce the most sonar buoys. And that meant the ocean belonged to the United States, with its seemingly limitless industrial capacity and systematic approach to technological warfare. Henke had been trained to fight a war of individual skill, tactical cunning, and operational expertise. He died in a war of production rates, technological systems, and industrial logistics. The transformation happened so rapidly, less than 2 years from confidence to obsolescence, that neither he nor most of his fellow U-boat commanders fully adapted. They continued applying 19th-century concepts of naval skill and courage to a 20th-century war of industrial systems. The cost of this mismatch was measured in thousands of lives and hundreds of submarines sent to the ocean floor. By 1945, when Germany surrendered, the U-boat service had been effectively destroyed. The surviving boats surrendered or were scuttled. The crews who remained alive were psychologically scarred by years of operating under conditions where death was statistically inevitable and survival represented only temporary reprieve. In the decades after the war, military historians and strategists studied the U-boat campaign as a case study in how technological innovation and industrial capacity could render obsolete even highly skilled, well-trained forces. The sonar buoy became a symbol of this lesson, a simple, cheap device that fundamentally changed the nature of submarine warfare through mass deployment rather than individual sophistication. For Werner Henke, standing in U-515's conning tower on that April morning in 1943, all of this remained unknown. He believed the ocean was vast and dark and favorable to submarines. He believed German tactical excellence would prevail against Allied numbers. He believed his expertise would continue to protect his crew. Within minutes, he would learn that everything he believed was obsolete. The ocean was no longer dark. Allied technology had made it transparent, and his expertise, developed over years of training and combat, had become insufficient against an enemy that could drop listening devices from aircraft and track submarines with industrial efficiency. The war continued for another 2 years after that April morning, but for Werner Henke and thousands like him, the decisive moment had already passed. The technological transformation was complete. The hunters had become the hunted, and the ocean that Germany had believed it controlled now belonged irrevocably to the Allies. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.